Every year in Sweden, approximately 26,000 people go missing. 97% of them are found shortly after their disappearance, about 2,700 of whom are deceased. The fate of the remaining 3% remains unknown. However, from time to time, when a person disappears, events unfold that are so unbelievable that they defy any logic. The disappearance of Linda Chen is one of such stories. On August 1st, 2009, Linda Chen and her fiancé Mats Alm returned home after a pleasant trip around the region. They were exploring attractions of interest to Linda's relatives, who would be attending their wedding in 2 weeks. After dinner, Linda left the apartment to meet a friend and disappeared. The police began their investigation, examining all leads. On September 16th, officers knocked on Mats's door to ask him additional questions, but they discovered that he had also vanished without a trace. 2 days later, a call came into the rescue service. The caller had just found Mats, shirtless and barefoot, in a panic, emerging from the forest. Mats explained that he had been abducted by 2 Chinese men who were after Linda's money. The kidnappers drugged him, placed him in the trunk of a car, and then brought him to the forest where he woke up engulfed in flames. Next to him was the body of his fiancée, Linda Chen. Linda Chen was born in 1977 in China. When she was 15 years old, her family sent her and her 12-year-old brother to Sweden, where they lived in a refugee camp. There, she met Aino Johansson, who became a second mother to Linda. Aino describes Linda as a sociable girl who was interested in fashion and enjoyed karaoke. After receiving an education, Linda became a nurse and got married. In 1998, their family welcomed a son named Alexander. However, the marriage fell apart when her husband attempted to kill Linda. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder. In her next marriage, she received $35,000. Her husband paid her this amount for a sham marriage, which allowed him to obtain a green card. For the third time, she got married to a chef from Falun, Sweden. Linda left her nursing job and took on a part-time role as a waitress at the China Thai restaurant. Although she divorced her husband after a few years, she continued working at the restaurant. By 2008, Linda found herself single again. She turned to online dating sites where she met Mats Alm. Born in 1975, Mats had a fairly typical childhood in Sweden. After finishing school, he joined the army but later served as a firefighter. He then worked at a store in Peru where he got engaged to a woman. Facing financial difficulties for their wedding, he resorted to embezzlement from work. They got married but soon divorced after Mats was arrested for stealing $10,000. He returned to Falun, Sweden, burdened with numerous debts and loans. Despite his financial troubles, he took on additional student loans to become a teacher. It was during this challenging period that he met Linda. On their first date, they discussed marriage, and a few weeks later, Mats moved in with Linda. Linda held traditional values and believed that if they were to live together, they should at least plan for a wedding. Therefore, just 2 months after their first date, they became engaged. Mats recalls proposing on May 5th, 2008, although Linda's friends insist that she brought up the question. On May 12th, just a week after their engagement, they took out insurance policies, naming each other as beneficiaries. The policies were worth $125,000. Linda also drafted a will, leaving everything to Mats. She didn't want her son's father to receive anything from Alexander's inheritance if she were to pass away before he turned 18. So, Linda instructed her fiancé that in case something happened to her, he should place the money in a trust account and give it to the boy when he goes to college. Meanwhile, Linda also paid off a significant portion of Mats's debts and provided him with money for personal expenses. In June 2009, the couple embarked on a month-long trip to China to visit Linda's family. The trip cost more than $10,000, and she covered all the expenses. She also took on the costs of the wedding, $6,000. A week before the wedding on August 1st, Linda finished her shift and came home. At 16:38, she and Mats were caught on a surveillance camera as they exited a grocery store. Linda was wearing a short white dress, white leggings, and high-heeled sandals. She looked perfectly happy, holding Mats's hand and smiling. Everything else known about that day and the subsequent months comes from Mats's account. The next day, Mats reported Linda's disappearance. He stated that after leaving the store, they went home and unpacked their groceries. Then they drove around the area, visiting tourist attractions of interest to their wedding guests who were to arrive the following week. They started by going to Torsang's Cafe, known for its unique steamboat attraction. Credit card transactions indeed confirmed this trip, but on July 30th. Next, They visited the location where the wedding ceremony was supposed to take place. Matz claimed it was quiet there, and they simply strolled around. However, the police later established that a large family celebration was happening there that day, and no one saw Matz or Linda. At 20 o'clock, they returned home, and Linda reheated the spring rolls she brought from work. They had dinner. It seems that Matz was indeed home at that time since his computer was turned on at 20:20. Linda had a meeting with a friend at 9 o'clock, so she washed her hair, applied fresh makeup, and left. She wore the same white dress and leggings she had been wearing all day. Her family and friends found it strange that someone who cared about fashion wouldn't change clothes, wash her hair, and redo her makeup before a meeting. It was very unlike her. That evening, no one saw Linda on the street or in any bar or restaurant, although it would have been hard to miss a petite Asian woman standing at 147 centimeters tall. Many people knew her due to her work at China Thai. After 1 a.m., Matt sent Linda a message and called her, but received no response. He intermittently called her throughout the night. At 9 a.m., he contacted the police, but they asked him to call back later, assuming that Linda had simply fallen asleep at a friend's house. At 10:44 a.m., he called the police again, and they advised him to check with her friends. At 1 p.m., he finally called Linda's alleged rendezvous partner, Tony Chen. Tony told Matz that he hadn't seen Linda that evening and that they hadn't even planned to meet. Matz dialed his fiancée's mobile phone 8 more times before he called the police for the 3rd time and told them the whole story about her not showing up for the meeting with Tony. Now the police began their investigation. When Linda didn't show up for work on Sunday, her colleagues realized that something was amiss. The news of Linda's disappearance made its way into newspapers, and television stations also picked up the story. That's how most of her acquaintances learned about her disappearance, because Matz didn't bother to inform them. Even Aino Johansson found out about Linda's disappearance from the media. It could have been assumed that Matz would check if she had heard anything about their adopted daughter before announcing her disappearance. When Aino finally called Matz herself, his voice sounded very upbeat. "I'm so glad you called," he exclaimed. Aino found his behavior quite unnerving. Meanwhile, investigators spoke with Tony Chen. He reiterated what he had told Matz and added that he only knew Linda as a colleague from the China Thai restaurant. He mentioned that he had never met her outside of the establishment when he was there with friends. Linda's former husband, the father of her son, was also invited for questioning, but he had a very solid alibi for the evening of Linda's disappearance. On August the 7th, Linda's relatives began arriving for the wedding. Matz greeted them and gave them a city tour. He showed them photos they had taken with Linda in China, appeared happy, and didn't even mention that Linda was missing. They learned about it from the news. On August 8th, Linda's friends and relatives gathered in the church where the wedding was planned to take place. They came together to pray and light candles, not knowing if she was alive, if she needed help, and everyone was deeply concerned and worried, except for the groom. Matz's relatives were also in the church, but he sat next to Aino Johansson. When the priest lit a candle and prayed for Linda, Matz leaned towards Aino and whispered, "How does the priest know Linda is dead?" After the service, Matz went to a local bar with his friends, where he enjoyed himself and drank. Needless to say, his behavior seemed more than just strange to many. The investigators quickly determined that despite their wedding plans, neither the groom nor the bride had made any orders for food or flowers. Could they have foreseen this? According to Linda's friends, it was unlikely. She was enthusiastic about the upcoming wedding and looked forward to the day. Did detectives need to explore other scenarios, like planning errors or financial difficulties? Did Linda's disappearance fit into any of these scenarios? Meanwhile, Matz had started working as a substitute teacher. He appeared to be in a cheerful mood, and none of his colleagues had any idea that his fiancée had gone missing. Aino Johansson maintained contact with the groom, her adopted daughter's fiancé, and would periodically call him. During one of their conversations, Matz asked how much time must pass before a missing person is declared dead. She suggested it could take up to 10 years. He responded that he couldn't wait that long. On September 2nd, Matz appeared on a TV show called Searching, discussing Linda's disappearance. He didn't shy away from speculating about the worst possible outcomes regarding what might have happened to her, including involvement with the Chinese mafia and human traffickers. He made a few odd statements, such as claiming to cry all day long even if he only drank 1 glass of water that day. He concluded by saying that he found crying useless because it didn't help. Interestingly, in this TV show, there's always an expert who assesses the words of both the victim and the suspect. In this episode, former criminology professor Leif G.W. Persson bluntly stated that the most likely culprit was Linda's fiancé. Later, when the police searched Mats's apartment, they found printed pages of Persson's comments and Mats's own notes on them. His appearance on the show didn't yield any significant results, as no new leads or witnesses emerged. On Tuesday, September 15th, the police called Mats and asked him to come to the station to answer additional questions. According to his colleagues, the call clearly unsettled and upset him. As you might guess, he didn't show up at the police station the next day. Officers went to his home, but he wasn't there either. They had to consider the possibility that he had disappeared by his own volition or someone had abducted him. The media picked up on this story, reporting on the disappearance of Mats Alm, but nobody knew his whereabouts. However, on September 18th, an unusual call came in to the emergency services. A man reported that he had been kidnapped, held hostage in a car trunk, and set on fire. Lars Goffen was near his cabin in the woods when he saw a shirtless and shoeless man running towards him. This alone indicated that something was wrong. After contacting the rescue service, Lars brought water and a blanket for Mats, and they sat and waited for the police and ambulance to arrive. The arriving officers asked Mats how he ended up in the woods, and he told them an unbelievable story. On September 15th, after work, Mats bought a pizza and headed home. He planned to spend the evening in front of the TV when a knock on the door interrupted him. Peering through the peephole, Mats thought it was Tony Chen. He opened the door only to find two Chinese men, neither of whom was Tony. They barged into the apartment. Threatening him with a knife, they forced Mats to swallow 2 pills, promising to take him to Linda. After taking the pills, Mats fell asleep on the couch. He woke up in the car trunk the next evening. When he knocked on the trunk, the kidnappers opened it and demanded to know where Linda's money was. Mats had no idea about any money. They gave him 2 more pills and closed the trunk. Interestingly, at the same time, someone used Mats's camera to take pictures of landmarks in Stockholm, including a selfie that resembled Mats. The next morning, the man woke up in the trunk and began screaming. He told the kidnappers that he needed to relieve himself and was hungry. The Chinese gave him a cup and fed him, of course, with Chinese takeout. When Mats again refused to reveal where Linda's money was, he was given 2 more pills. Meanwhile, someone used Mats's laptop to connect to the Wi-Fi at a library in Stockholm. This unknown person, whoever they might be, was searching for Mats's ex-wife, his former student, and a school friend. The next morning, Mats woke up in the trunk again and asked to use the restroom. The kidnappers allowed him to do so and then gave him more pills. While Mats was in the trunk, his laptop connected to Wi-Fi on a bus in Stockholm. This was observed by several witnesses, including the bus driver, who saw a man using the laptop that looked very much like Mats. Finally, on August 18th, the now conscious hostage asked for water. The 2 kidnappers, who had stood by the car in the woods for 3 days for some inexplicable reason, gave him a bottle of water and more pills. Around noon, witnesses in the village of Tallberg reported seeing a man who strikingly resembled Mats, whose disappearance had been widely publicized. On the same day, at 4:30 p.m., Mats opened his eyes and found himself on the ground in the woods. Realizing he was on fire, he tore off his shirt and put out the fire on his pants. Seeing Linda's body in a white dress under the branches, he understood what had happened. He started running to seek help. He ran until he reached a road about 20 miles north of Falun. As no passing cars stopped, he sprinted to a cabin owned by Lars Goffen. Lars called the police. Mats received medical attention at the hospital. His burns were not too serious. The toxicology report showed no traces of medication in his system. Additionally, the doctor stated that if Mats had been in the trunk for so long, there would have been signs of trauma on his body. In early November, approximately 1.5 months after the discovery of Linda, Mats's father contacted the police, stating that he had found some strange items at home that they should see. These turned out to be Mats's laptop and camera, as well as a handwritten letter. The laptop provided crucial evidence to prove that Mats had searched multiple times on the search engine for information on how to leave Sweden without money. It also allowed investigators to track the man's movements in Stockholm while he was supposedly confined in the trunk by the cruel kidnappers. Selfies and other photographs from Stockholm were found on the phone. In the letter addressed to his parents, he wrote the following: Hello, Mom and Dad. If you are reading this letter, it means that something has happened to me. I think the people I am trying to track down, the people responsible for Linda's disappearance, got rid of me. I think I'm getting close to solving it, so I will hide some important things here. If not, I will retrieve them later myself and be able to use the laptop during visits. Love you both with all my heart, Mats. The police believe that Mats left these items at his parents' house on September 18th, presumably while he was held against his will. The investigators presented the man with the selfie on his phone and asked how he could be in two places at once. He replied that while the man in the photo strongly resembled him, it wasn't his hat, so it wasn't him. According to him, the Chinese mafia had hired someone who looked like him to roam around Sweden and set him up for Linda's murder, even though he was actually in captivity by the kidnappers. He couldn't explain why the mafia initially wanted to frame him for the murder of his fiancée, but then decided to kill her in the same location where Linda's body was found. Perhaps their plans changed. Adhering to a consistent story, he stated that he didn't write the letter found at his parents' house. Despite both his parents and handwriting analysis confirming that he was the author, he maintained that it wasn't his writing. The man was, of course, arrested. However, since Linda's body had been in the woods for a prolonged period, the forensic pathologist couldn't determine the exact date of death. They could only conclude that she had passed away between August 1st and 9th. Due to this limitation, it was impossible to establish how she died, let alone prove that a murder had taken place. Forensic experts were able to ascertain that it was Mats who moved and hid Linda's body. Therefore, he was charged with tampering with a body and sentenced to 1.5 years of imprisonment. However, as he had been in custody prior to the verdict, he was released immediately after the trial. What exactly happened to Linda is something we may never know. It's possible that she became disillusioned when Mats exceeded the budget for their wedding and failed to arrange catering and flowers. According to Person's opinion, an argument escalated, and Mats strangled her. This was further supported by a red mark on his neck during those days, as if he had been in a fight, although he couldn't explain its origin. On the other hand, it could have been an unfortunate accident. Perhaps Linda had a heart attack, and Mats panicked. Even the most extreme theory cannot be debunked, suggesting that Linda asked to be killed herself in order for her son to receive insurance money. While highly unlikely, when the cause of death cannot be established, it's impossible to accuse anyone of murder without knowing exactly what happened. It is more likely that Mats disposed of Linda's body on the night of her disappearance, even before they returned from the store where they were captured on surveillance cameras. Judging from his online search queries, he initially considered fleeing the country, but when he realized it was not feasible without money, he came up with a different plan. He realized that until Linda's body was found, she wouldn't be declared deceased, and therefore he wouldn't receive the insurance money for several more years. So he concocted a story about being kidnapped and taken to the woods, where Linda's body lay. Again, according to Leif Person's theory, he didn't even intend to set himself on fire, but his clothes caught fire when he attempted to burn Linda's body. Regardless, all of these are mere speculations. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the fact that after his release, Mats did receive the insurance money from Linda's policy. However, his lawyer managed to persuade him to give the money to Linda's son. It's a small silver lining in this horrific case. Of course, no amount of money can bring back a mother, but at least her son can start his adult life with a greater sense of financial security.